Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is our very first episode, the show where we take a whole stack of sources, articles, research, notes, and, well, pull out the most important bits of knowledge just for you. And this deep dive is brought to you by our producers, Alebib and Malkarov.
That's right.
Today, we're jumping headfirst into cybersecurity. Specifically, we're looking at data breaches, incident response, and digital forensics, all based on the material you shared with us.
And it's a fascinating area. The sources really hammer home how incredibly valuable data is these days. I mean, it's the engine for so many businesses.
Which makes it a prime target, naturally.
Exactly. And the consequences of not protecting it, well, they're massive.
Yeah.
The sources keep mentioning the financial costs. We're talking figures close to, what, $5 million on average per breach?
Wow.
Yeah, and that's before you even factor in the damage to a company's reputation. That kind of thing can be permanent, really hard to fix.
Absolutely. So understanding the threats, knowing how to react, and maybe most importantly, how to prevent these things, that's crucial.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so let's unpack this term. When the sources talk about a cybersecurity breakthrough, what exactly are they getting at?
Well, thinking about it from the viewpoint of our sources, especially in forensics, a breakthrough basically means a successful intrusion.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah, someone unauthorized gets in, they have bad intentions, and it leads to a data breach or some other major security incident. It fundamentally undermines, confidentiality, integrity, or availability, the core pillars.
So it's not just a near miss, it's they're in.
They're in. And like we said, the sources are clear. That $4.88 million average figure is pretty staggering.
It really is.
And again, that often doesn't fully capture that long-term reputational harm. It just underscores why putting mitigation measures in place is so important for you.
Right. So how are attackers actually achieving these breakthroughs? What are the common methods mentioned in our sources?
Well, there are quite a few. Phishing comes up again and again as the most common. Tricking people.
Classic social engineering.
It's exactly. Exploiting human error, lack of awareness. Then there's ransomware, locking up data, devices, often stealing data too.
Nasty stuff.
Very. Insider threats are another one, people inside causing harm, intentionally or not. And even physical theft.
Physical theft. You mean like someone actually breaking in or something else?
It could be that, criminals physically stealing devices. But the sources also point to simpler things like employees losing laptops or phones when they're out of the office.
And those devices might have sensitive stuff on them.
Precisely. Unencrypted stuff, sometimes.
Yeah, it gets really interesting because the sources gave some specific examples of that physical theft, particularly in healthcare.
They did. Two really stand out. Back in 2018, a stolen laptop from a Copland Health Systems employee, and it was unencrypted exposed data for 43,000 patients.
Ouch. Unencrypted.
Yeah. And then just this year, 2024, a TimeDoc employee had a laptop stolen on public transport. It was password protected, sure, but the actual patient data on it, not encrypted.
That just screams, doesn't it? The need for encrypting sensitive data, especially on portable devices, passwords aren't enough. And you need things like 2FA, MFA.
Exactly. That's a key takeaway.
Ooh.
The sources also differentiate some related terms, which is helpful, like data exfiltration. That's specifically about data being transferred out without authorization.
Got it. Moving data out.
Right. And sensitive data itself is defined pretty broadly. Health info, trade secrets, personal details, financial stuff, highly valuable. A data breach is more the umbrella term for any unauthorized access.
Okay. Any good examples of that exfiltration specifically?
Yeah, the 2019 Capital One breach is mentioned. A former cloud provider employee exploited a misconfiguration in the cloud setup.
Ah, the insider angle again, sort of.
Kind of, yeah. They managed to steal data from, I think it was 106 million customers, pure exfiltration. Another example tied to this was the Log4j vulnerability in 2021.
Oh, I remember that one. That was huge.
It was. Attackers used that critical flaw not just to get in, but specifically to set up command and control channels to siphon data out.
Right. Moving from those sort of opportunistic or common attacks, the sources also talk about advanced persistent threats, APTs. These seem like a whole different ballgame.
You really are. APTs are different because the actors involved often have very specific long-term goals. They're frequently backed by nation states or, highly organized, well-funded groups.
So not just looking for a quick buck.
No, definitely not. Their aim is often more strategic undermining capabilities, gathering intelligence over a long period. They might even come back to the same systems multiple times.
Like digital spies, almost.
That's a good way to think about it. It takes significant resources, time, expertise. And they tend to be much more cautious about getting caught.
Lower risk tolerance.
Exactly. So they focus on specific targets and use sophisticated techniques, things like fileless malware that runs only in memory, or obfuscation to hide their tracks, trying to bypass those standard signature-based security tools.
And how do they usually get that initial foothold? Still phishing.
Often, yes, but highly targeted. Spear phishing. They'll research their targets extensively to make the lures incredibly believable. Exploiting zero-day vulnerabilities is another key method.
Flaws nobody knows about yet.
Right. Flaws the vendor doesn't even know about or hasn't patched. That lets them slip past defenses undetected.
And what's the end game for these APTs, according to the sources?
The final stage is achieving whatever their primary objective was. That could be exfiltrating huge amounts of sensitive data, maybe sabotaging critical infrastructure, or sometimes deploying ransomware, perhaps as a distraction or final blow. By then, they're usually deeply embedded.
Okay, so when these breaches happen, whether it's a common attack or a sophisticated APT, organizations need to respond. This is where DFIR comes in, right? Digital forensics and incident response.
That's exactly it. DFIR is this specialized field combining, well, digital detective work with the practical steps of responding to an incident. It goes way beyond just stopping the bleeding.
So what's its main purpose? What does DFIR actually do?
Its primary goal is to uncover evidence. Evidence that can stand up in court or be used for regulatory reporting or just for internal understanding. It's about meticulously collecting and analyzing digital clues to figure out exactly how the attack happened, why it happened, maybe even who was behind it.
Like a post-mortem, almost.
A very detailed one. The sources actually frame a successful intrusion, not just as a failure, but as a kind of mandatory high-stakes learning opportunity. You have to do this deep inquiry.
Right, so it's not just fixing the immediate problem, it's about learning deeply from it to prevent the next one.
Precisely. That deep analysis helps you pinpoint entry methods, figure out exactly what data was affected, maybe even build a profile of the attacker. All that feeds back into improving your defenses.
Makes sense. What are the main benefits for an organization that really invests in good DFIR?
The sources list quite a few. It obviously gives you a much better handle on your own vulnerabilities and the threats you're facing. It helps you recover faster, which means less downtime, lower financial losses.
And protects the reputation, presumably.
Definitely helps preserve reputation. Shows you're handling things competently. It also ensures you meet compliance requirements. And interestingly, the sources suggest effective DFIR can seriously cut down recovery time, like from an average of 277 days down to under 200.
Wow, that's a significant difference.
It really is.
Okay, so walk us through the process. According to the sources, what are the typical steps in a DFIR investigation? Where does it start?
Well, most frameworks like NIST or SANS start with identification or scoping. Basic figuring out how bad the incident is, how widespread it is, and where the potential evidence might be hiding.
And then you've got to grab that evidence quickly, especially the stuff that might disappear.
Absolutely critical. That's the preservation and collection phase. You have to prevent tampering, maintain that chain of custody rigorously.
Meaning you track who touched what when.
Exactly. Document every single step, every handler, time, place. Use things like checksums hashing to prove the data hasn't been altered. This is vital for legal reliability. Then you methodically collect the data from the relevant systems, servers, endpoints, whatever was involved.
Okay. Evidence collected and preserved. Then the real digging starts.
Yes. Investigation and analysis. This is where the forensic experts interpret everything. They pull in threat intelligence, look for known patterns, and dive deep into the data sources. The sources list several key areas they focus on.
Like what?
Network traffic logs, looking for suspicious connections, data moving where it shouldn't. Memory dumps, snapshots of RAM are crucial for finding malware that doesn't write to the disk, so-called fileless malware.
Clever stuff.
Yeah, disk images, analyzing the file system itself, looking at timestamps, deleted files maybe. The Windows registry is a goldmine for finding persistence mechanisms, seeing what settings were changed. Browser artifacts history. Cache can show attacker research or phishing links. USB device history might point to insider activity or physical access. And event logs, system logs, security logs are fundamental for building a timeline of exactly what happened when.
That is a deep dive into the digital footprint. Okay, analysis done. What's next?
Next up is containment. The sources call this the linchpin phase. Absolutely crucial.
The linchpin. Why?
Because it's all about stopping the threat from spreading further. Isolating affected machines, disabling compromised accounts. You need to limit the damage, stabilize things, even if it means some temporary disruption to business. You can't effectively eradicate the threat if it's still spreading.
Got it. Stop the bleeding before you try to heal the wound.
Exactly that analogy.
Yeah.
Then comes eradication, getting rid of the malicious stuff completely. Removing malware, resetting compromised passwords, patching the vulnerability they use.
And then getting back to normal.
That's recovery. Restoring systems, restoring data, hopefully from clean, secure backups. The sources mention immutable or air-gapped backups as ideal, and then monitoring closely to make sure the threat is truly gone.
And it doesn't end there, does it?
No, there's the post-incident phase. Analysis, reporting, transformation. You document everything you learned, identify the root causes, the security gaps. You harden your systems based on that, update your response plans. And the reports need to be tailored. Executives need the business impact summary. Tech teams need the nitty-gritty details.
What are some of the big hurdles in this field? What makes DFIR challenging?
Well, the sheer volume of data is often immense. Terabytes of logs aren't unusual. Plus, attackers use encryption and anti-forensics techniques trying to hide their tracks or destroy evidence.
Making the detective work harder.
Much harder. And investigators always have to navigate privacy laws and ethical considerations. Collecting evidence has to be done carefully, complying with regulations like GDPR or IPAT.
Let's connect this to some of those real-world examples mentioned. What lessons did WannaCry teach us, according to the sources?
WannaCry, back in 2017, hit systems globally, like the NHS in the UK. It exploited a known Windows vulnerability, Eternal Blue. The big lesson. Proactive vulnerability management. You have to patch systems regularly.
Don't wait until it's exploited.
Precisely. Patching hygiene is critical.
And what about the huge Yahoo hack?
Yahoo, 2014, 500 million accounts, compromised by a state-sponsored group. The key takeaway there was the need for immediate response and transparent disclosure. Yahoo faced a lot of criticism and legal trouble for delaying the announcement.
Right. Timing is everything in the response. SolarWinds was another big one more recently.
Oh yeah, SolarWinds in 2020. That was a sophisticated supply chain attack. Malicious code hidden inside a legitimate software update.
Scary stuff.
Very. Lessons learned there include the need for really thorough vendor risk assessments, knowing what's in the software you use. Also, multi-factor authentication, advanced threat detection beyond signatures, and using things like software bills of materials, or SBOMs.
So these cases, WannaCry, Yahoo, SolarWinds, plus the healthcare laptop thefts, Capital One's cloud breach, Marriott, Hannah Anderson's website malware, they really paint a picture of diverse threats coming from all sides.
They absolutely do. And they also really highlight the importance of regulatory compliance, which the sources spend some time on.
Okay, tell us about those key regulations.
Well, there's GDPR in Europe, strict rules, 72-hour breach notification deadline, potentially massive fines, like up to 4% of global revenue. Yeah. CCPA in California also requires notifying residents and the state attorney general. hxxps in the U.S. is crucial for healthcare, protecting patient data with strict controls and notification rules. GLBA covers U.S. financial institutions. They need to explain how they safeguard customer data. And PCI DSS is the standard for anyone handling credit card information.
So compliance isn't just ticking a box to avoid fines, although that's a big motivator.
Not at all. It's really fundamental to protecting sensitive information, maintaining trust, and ensuring you handle incidents legally. A good incident response plan has to include clear steps for notification, evidence handling for legal purposes, and reporting according to these regulations. Privacy and legal aren't afterthoughts. They're baked into the DFIR process.
Okay, so given this complex web of threats, response procedures, compliance, what can organizations actually do to defend themselves better? What mitigation steps do the sources recommend?
Lots of practical measures mentioned. Using data loss prevention or DLP tools to keep an eye on sensitive data leaving the network. Employee training keeps coming up. It's vital because so many attacks target people.
The human element again.
Always. Managing privileges is key too, the principle of least privilege. Only give people the access they absolutely need and cut off access quickly when someone leaves.
Basic hygiene, but important. What about more technical stuff?
Encryption, encryption, encryption. Especially for sensitive data on mobile devices, like we saw with those laptops. Robust malware protection, scanning files, segmenting the network to contain breaches if they happen.
Network segmentation, right?
Yeah. And implementing zero trust policies is highlighted. Basically, don't trust anyone or anything by default. Verify everything.
Shifting the security perimeter inward.
Exactly.
And how about finding threats early, before they cause chaos?
Integrating threat intelligence is important, knowing what attackers are doing right now. using advanced detection tools, SIME, EDR, UEBA. The sources emphasize these because they use behavioral analysis, AI, machine learning to spot weird activity that old signature-based tools would miss.
Looking for anomalies, not just known bad stuff.
Right, and proactive threat hunting, actively looking for trouble instead of waiting for an alert.
Any other specific tools or approaches mentioned?
Things like dark web scanning, checking if your data is already out there for sale,
Yeah.
using business VPNs for secure connections, DNS filtering to block malicious websites, download protection. For insider risks, network segmentation helps limit the blast radius.
Makes sense.
And for managing powerful admin accounts, using PAM privilege access management and LAPS local admin password solutions to reduce the risk of those critical accounts being compromised. And of course, regular patching and dealing with old unsupported legacy systems. That's fundamental, especially thinking back to WannaCry.
Oh.
And testing your backups. Regularly making sure you can actually restore from them. That's non-negotiable.
Absolutely critical for recovery. Wow, okay. That was definitely a deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from common breach types and those sophisticated APTs through the whole DFIR process, the importance of compliance, and a whole range of defensive strategies.
Yeah, and what really strikes me is how it all fits together. Strong security isn't just about preventing that first point of entry. It's also about having the right processes, the right tools, the right people ready to go when something does happen. And then crucially, learning from it every single time.
So for you listening, what's the big takeaway here?
I think it's that staying informed is vital. Understanding how attackers operate, knowing the signs of a breach, having a grasp of incident response steps, being aware of those regulations, it's all part of the picture now. It just reinforces that cybersecurity isn't a one-time fix. It's this dynamic, ongoing process of attention, training, and adaptation.
That leaves us with a really interesting question for you to ponder. In today's world, with attacks getting more sophisticated and data literally everywhere, should the main focus for organizations be on building resilience, the ability to bounce back quickly when breaches inevitably happen? Or can we, realistically, still aim to prevent every single potential breakthrough? Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope you found these insights valuable. And remember, this deep dive was brought to you by the producers, Labib and Mal Krove. Join us next time for another deep dive into the topics that matter. Goodbye for now.